Yesterday, news broke that SK Telecom had acquired Duke, formerly of Najin EM Fire, as their new top laner. Marin, their previous top laner, who was with them for the Season 5 World Championship, left the team and has since gone to LGD Gaming, the Chinese squad that bombed out the group stages despite being, on paper, one of the best rosters at the tournament. And now SK Telecom has Duke. So what this Mangaka's Musings is going to be talking about is what Duke brings to the SK Telecom team. Before that, we're going to go into a bit of Duke's history so we can kind of learn a little bit more about the player. We'll talk about his time briefly on non-GM Fire, what he brings to SK Telecom, and what this could mean for SK Telecom's 2016 season. So we're going to start off with Duke. So Duke originally got his start in the 2014 season. He was with KT Roaster Bullets, but he was under the name Leopard. So if you know of the player Leopard, who played top lane for KT Roaster, this is the same player. This is now Duke. He came into them with the Season 8 World Championship of IEM. He was their starting top laner. That was the tournament that KT Roaster Bullets swept. They beat Fnatic 3-0 in the final. They played in Spring 2014, the Champions Spring, the next season. They made the quarterfinals there, but they lost 3-2 to Najin White Shield. It was after that Duke became Duke. He changed his name from Leopard. He joined Najin Black Sword, is their new top laner. He played summer with them. They once again made it to the quarterfinals, but they lost 3-2 to SK Telecom T1S. And then in this season now, we have Duke coming into Najin EM Fire. So you have to keep in mind that, Duke, he's been a quarterfinalist in both seasons that he's played for with two different teams. He's regarded as a very good top laner by a lot of people, and so coming into the 2015 season last year with Najin Fire, Najin was one of the teams that a lot of people expected to do ridiculously well. It was a pretty stacked lineup by most people's accordances. You had OQ, a very talented ADC, aside from his positioning mistakes that were, become all too frequently. You had, who else was on that roster? You had Gung in the mid lane, who, we kind of knew Gung, but he was still good as far as the assassin players go. You would have the Kane and Pure for the supports. Those would be swapping off. I can't recall too well who was there. You also had Watch in the jungle. Watch being a player who always seemed to ramp up around the time that Worlds is coming along. The point of the matter is Najin had a very stellar lineup this season, and most people expected them to do quite well, be top 3 at the very least. Instead, this year, Najin completely failed all expectations. By all means, Najin failed as an organization to have a successful season just based on the talent that they had up. Somehow they put together a team that was less than the sum of their parts. They would go out in 6th place, not even make the playoffs in the spring season. They would eventually be able to get into the playoffs this season, but they would go out in the first round against the Ku Tigers, going 2-1 in a best-of-3 series. They later had their shot to go to Worlds because they were able to qualify to the Korean regional finals, but they would get 3-0'd by Jinware in Jin Air's almost successful attempt to go to Worlds in their Cinderella run from the bottom of the gauntlet. So ultimately, Najin had a very poor season. You contribute that to, Gung needed to be replaced in the mid lane. OQ had his positioning mistakes. Duke also has a couple errors on his part, but there was something fundamentally wrong with the team itself. But that being said, Duke was, by all means, in most people's consideration, a good top laner, a fantastic top laner even. You have to consider the fact that in the spring season of this year, Duke, if I remember correctly, where is that reward that they have listed? If I remember correctly, he was actually able to win the MVP of the entire league in spring, despite the fact that, it was spring, despite the fact that Najin went out in 6 and even make playoffs. So this player who was on a team that didn't even make playoffs was able to accrue enough MVP points that he was the MVP of the whole league, that particular split. For those of you who don't know, the MVP system works like this in Korea. They would vote on a player within the week that was the most valuable player for their team, and then that would give you points, and they did this by the week, and Duke had the most votes every week, and so he got the award that led to him getting points, and ultimately he had the most points by the end of it. He even beat out Faker, who was winning a lot of SK Telecom's MVP awards. So that's how good that we could argue that Duke is the fact that he was on a 6th place team, but he still won MVP of the whole league in spring. So now that he's now Najin, they've disbanded, they're Najin no longer exists. They've given on out. And now, their players are, going to a bunch of different organizations, things like that. And Duke has been picked up by SK Telecom. So what does Duke bring to SK Telecom? Well, for starters, a very strong mechanical top laner, something that they've had before with Marin. If you remember, Marin was a challenger main. He was kind of hyped up as the faker of top lane within the region. This is according to some of the casters within the scene. And so SK Telecom losing that, those are quite some big shoes to fill, because Marin, if you remember, he has quite a wide champion pool. He could play the tanks back when the tanks were the meta thing. He was able to go on into the split push carry top laner role with a very good Fiora at the World Championship. And Renekton, he debuted, well, he didn't debut Renekton, he brought Renekton out. He was the first player to use Renekton at the Season 5 World Championship, so that's what I mean by that. But he was known as a Renekton main when he was originally scouted. Duke is very similar in terms of guards. Looking at the summer split, his most games played were on Maokai, with a total of 15, but he also had a very strong Hecarim and Rumble games, boasting respectable KDAs of both of the champions, a 6.3 on Hecarim and a 9 on Rumble in the past summer season. His win rates are, with several champions, are a little bit low, but then again, Najin also was losing a lot of games, so this is where you have to kind of be careful when we're just plainly looking at his stats. But, it's a very strong top laner with a huge champion pool. That, we can argue with, we can debate on how effective it is, but the point of the matter is he's played a lot of champions competitive play, and he's seen proficient with most of those champions. So that seems like a great pickup for SK Telecom, right? You got a mechanically strong top laner, probably someone that you can keep up with a similar identity that SK Telecom had, where you can give Duke a lot of resources to carry the game, give Faker, less resources by means, but Faker is Faker, so he'll still keep up even though he's getting less gold for the team. Then Duke can take control of the game, probably be a split push threat. Okay, so it seems like a very good stylistic fit for SK Telecom. Now, what are some of the things that don't make this move as good as it could be? Well, the fact that Duke is actually not a shot caller. From multiple people within the scene, Papa Smithy, who casts the scene, Kefka LOL, who keeps up with the Korean amateur scene, actually, one of the very few people who does it, as well as talks to some of the players within the scene. Both of those sources, as well as probably everyone else you can talk to, says that Duke is a quiet person. He does not shot call. He does not communicate a lot within the comms. So what does that mean for SK Telecom? It means that while, yes, they were able to get a strong mechanical laner for themselves, they haven't replaced Marin's shot calling yet. This is one of the reasons why, as a fan of the Tigers, or rather a fan of the player Smeb, who top lanes for the Tigers, I think personally that had Smeb been interested in moving from the Tigers, that he would have been a perfect fit for SK Telecom. He's been able to play the tanks like Marin, he's been able to play split push like Marin, he probably had the best Fiora of the entire World Championship this last year, and he shot calls for the Tigers, and the fact that the Tigers have such a great mid and late game macro play is probably a result of Smeb shot calling, so we can attribute that to him. So by all means, giving him over to SK Telecom, or getting him on SK Telecom rather, would have been, it would have been a perfect fit, and potentially even an upgrade for the team, considering how good the Tigers mid game was, even from a deficit. That being said, though, Smeb was never interested in leaving the Tigers. He's been locked in on the roster for them. Tigers are currently looking for a new mid laner and jungler. I think they're doing tryouts for mid and tryouts for jungler. I know that their jungler Hojin has retired, but that's for a different topic right now. So we couldn't get Smeb. This brings up the point of, what other top laners were available. I think Trace is no longer part of Gen Air, but Trace has kind of had a lackluster split. He's quite passive in lane. Would have been a good fit for SK Telecom. Who other top laners were available? I think Kuve of Samsung was available, but Kuve is not exactly the best, so SK Telecom shouldn't have been looking at that. Oh, who else would have been free and available? There's been so many players moving around. In all honesty, I think that Duke was probably one of the best mechanical players that you could have picked up. If Smeb was available, I think SK Telecom should have gone with Smeb, but that's a bit of my bias there. I think Duke is perfectly fine and he can fit in with SK Telecom. But the fact that he doesn't shot call means that he's not going to be a clean plug-in and play for SK Telecom. He's not going to just completely replace Marn, so you can't sit down SK Telecom and say, all right, well, guys, we lost our old top laner, so what we're going to do is, here's a new top laner who does the same exact role within the team as far as communication goes as our old top laner. All right, plug and play, you just got to listen to a different voice. All right, so what that means is that now SK Telecom has to look at, who is going to be taking over the shot calling role. Now, speculation is residing on between Wolf, the support player, and Bangi, the jungler. So why would we not have Duke do it, Bang do it, or Faker do it? So Duke, quiet. He's just quiet. If you're a quiet person, you're not going to be able to really shot call because you're not going to have the personality to be loud and outspoken about it. Faker, we probably don't want to concern like the best player in the world, who is a mechanical god by all means, with shot calling. We've seen that, taking on the shot caller role and have to preoccupy your thoughts with managing the team can take away from your focus on the lane and focus on building up advantages and your own micro play. We've seen that. Probably the most notable example for that for North American fans or Western fans would be Bjergsen of Team Solo Mid. His decline from his drop from spring 2014 to summer 2014 when he took on a shot calling role after the departure of, I think it was Xpecial. I think it was summer that Xpecial left TSM. I could be wrong on that, but around that time period, Bjergsen took up the shot calling role for Team Solo Mid, and he wasn't bodying kids as hard. He was still really good, like still the best in the league, but he just wasn't destroying everybody like he was beforehand. So moving on, so we don't want Faker to do that, and then Bang is the ADC, and we don't really see a whole lot of ADC shot callers, and probably for a similar reason as for the mid lane, they got to be focusing on their micro play. All right, so that leaves us with the jungler and the support. Now, reasons why we usually have one of these two roles be shot callers, or why it's preferable, is because they are the least mechanically intensive roles in the game. Starting from support, you don't have to worry about CSing in lane, you just have to mind your positioning. You do have to be watching for the trades and be active about it, but because there will be some time where it's like, okay, this guy doesn't have his cooldowns, we're playing passively right here, or hey, there's a lane swap situation going on, I can just roam around the map, get some vision down. You could take the time to move the camera around, gather up information, and then make some decisions based off of that. Jungler, probably the least mechanically intensive role when it comes to just the early game, because they don't even have to worry about laning, they just have to worry about clearing the jungle camps. While there is a bit of science and finesse to clearing a jungle camp, okay, kill this monster first so I take less damage, or my jungle wrap having here. You don't have to worry about last hitting the camp, you just have to burn it down with your spells, so you can be clearing a camp, let your character do its thing, and then move around, look around the map, kind of make decisions and shot call around that. So there's that element to it. So that's kind of why most teams prefer to have either support or jungle be the shot caller. We've seen it work from other positions, of course, but those are the two preferred roles. Okay, so how could that be an issue for SK Telecom if they have to have Wolf or Bangi do the shot calling role? Well, first off, we don't know how those two will even shot call. You have to remember that SK Telecom had both of these players, but they chose to go with Marin, their top laner, to handle the shot calling. I don't know why exactly that was. Maybe he had the right personality for it. Maybe he just had a gift for it. Maybe he was most trainable for it. I mean, who really knows? But there's a reason that they picked Marin over Bangi or Wolf to do the shot calling for them. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at investing into one of those two players to learn how to shot call the game. I don't know if there's ever been a point where those players have been in charge of shot calling. I don't know if Bangi did back in Season 3 when SK Telecom were super dominant. I don't know about when Wolf did it, so, I'm a little bit blind in on here, and I don't know how either their shot calling actually looks for them. But the big thing is that I also don't know what the team dynamic was within them. We know that Martin was a shot caller, but was Wolf active in shot calling as well? Did he disagree with some of Marin's shot calls? But because Marin was the shot caller and had the final say, the team went with what Marin said. There's a whole team dynamic element. Pardon me. There is a whole team dynamic that we're not currently aware of right now that could be affected. What if everybody's used to discounting everything that Wolf said, for example? I mean, if that's the case, then the whole team basically has to relearn, or have to retrain themselves rather, how to respond to Wolf shot calling and to go ahead with it. So there could be some rocky starts to SK Telecom adapting to their new shot callers, either because the team isn't used to following their orders, maybe they're not even good at shot calling. It's really hard to say on that. So we'll have to see how SK Telecom's macro play is handled. I think that they might be a rough to rocky start, maybe a rougher spring split, but probably around by summer, it's fair to say that Marin came on in. He was a challenger level scouted player that was brought into the organization, and he most certainly went through some of the training and things like that, and it's more than likely that he was actually trained how to shot call, and he just was able to manage it incredibly well. So, it probably stands to reason that, assuming that Wolf and Bangi are coachable within the team, assuming that those are going to be one of the two players that SK Telecom chooses to have be the new shot caller, that they can eventually, over time, after making some mistakes, after having a lot of practice with it, can eventually develop into fairly good shot callers, and SK Telecom will go back to having a similar level macro game that they did beforehand this last year. Okay, so I think that kind of rounds up this video. We talked about SK Telecom acquiring Duke. It's a very good pickup for the team, but it doesn't solve all their problems where that occurred because of Marin leaving the team. They're still going to have to figure out the shot-calling chemistry within the team, whether that means that somehow they figure out how to develop Duke, which is unlikely given his personality. Teach Bengi or Wolf if they need that kind of information. The team will have to relearn how to interact with those players and give power over to them, where perhaps they didn't do so before. It's a lot of speculatory things in there, but ultimately, what we could probably guess is that SK Telecom is going to do fairly similarly well as far as their mechanical play is concerned with Duke. I don't think that they're going to have to change up their plans for the early game a whole lot. Duke is going to be able to comfortably kind of live up to Marin's legacy, if that makes sense, where he's going to be able to perform at a similar level, but the team's macro game shot calling is probably going to hurt just a little bit because they're going to be adapting to a new team environment as players who existed before in the old environment who had a different level of voice within the team. Now suddenly are going to be given, all the voice within the team, and everyone's going to have to learn to listen to him and go with what he says, whereas beforehand they might not have done so before. So that's a very interesting question that I unfortunately don't know well enough of how that's going to play out, but that's what we're looking for SK Telecom coming up in the 6th season. So Duke to SK Telecom, pretty cool move. Pretty sure many fans of Duke are happy with that movement, and best wishes to SK Telecom and Duke in their next season. Thank you guys for watching. See you, Mangaka signing out.